realm of pain. I will bathe this world in blood. Impressive but futile. No. You shall be reneged!
Death will never come anymore. Your soul burns for me. Kulamak! Give your soul to me. Kulamak! Arise, my children. Feed! Give your soul to me. Kulamak! Darkness falls.
We are nothing. I have already seen you lose this battle. You have broken the circle. Tear the cosmos.
I will not rest until this land is cleansed. Mitigate.
Hello and welcome, Exiles, to what will be my guide for the tri-stack Hexblast of Contradiction Spellblade Inquisitor. Now, let's get into the basics of what this character is. Then we're going to go into some more specific things like why we're doing our tree pathing, how to do some ring crafts or gear crafting for various pieces, etc., etc. Now, to start things off with, what is the whole concept of the character? Pretty simple. We're using Ivory Tower, stacking a bunch of strength int dex to get, i.e. a lot of life. We're reserving that life, and Ivory Tower gives us a big energy shield pool, and that energy shield pool we're turning into a very large flat lightning one-hander, then combining that with Battle Mage from Instruments of Virtue on the Inquisitor and Spellblade support. What this ends up meaning is, essentially, we get this amount of flat damage added to our skill at a 2.4x multiplier, because Spellblade gives 140% of the blade to the skill. What that means is this 3,400 damage, which goes to an average of like 2k, a little bit less, but around there, around an average of 2k, that ends up being around 5k once you multiply by 2.4. And then after all that's said and done, it's applied to Contradiction at a 340% effectiveness, i.e. we are adding a whole lot of flat, something around 15,000 plus average damage is how much we're giving to it. That's why you'll see my skill is level 15, and not level 21. I'm not really prioritizing trying to push levels because I already have so much flat damage. The flat damage for the chaos skill is pretty irrelevant. You'll see on our tooltip, we deal at a minimum 17,000, which is higher than the chaos portion, and goes all the way up to like 340,000 flat lightning, which is many multiple times more than you could get even if you leveled the skill up. Now, why specifically level 15? It's pretty simple. This is one thing I want to go over, very stress, very important. It's all about the amount of space you have to reserve. You'll see my life pool here is 585. That's the amount of space I have that I haven't reserved yet. So if I start throwing down these mines, you'll notice we get down to 180. We start reserving more. We get more ES. And then after that, I want to throw again. I throw 3 mines. You want a little bit of extra space here just to make sure you can throw 3 mines on top of the mines you've already thrown. And the thing is, this is where the level comes into factor, because the level matters for how much money, or sorry, not for how much reservation you end up have for a high level skill. I.e., a higher level skill will reserve more life, a lower level skill will reserve less. This level I've changed depending on how much life I have, depending on how much I've invested into the character. At one point, I had it at level 1. At one point, I had it at level 12. At one point, I had it at level 15. Essentially, play around how much little space you have reserving-wise, and you want to make sure you can be able to throw up to 15 mines and then 3 on top of that. If you can't throw that many, you need to get more reservation efficiency into your character, or you need to de-level Contradiction in order to throw those extra mines. Don't feel too bad about de-leveling this. Even at level 21, it is dealing less than 10% of our total damage. The difference between having a level 21 gem and a level 1 gem is a very small damage difference in the grand scheme of the build. So feel free to de-level this based on how much reservation space you have. Just make sure you can throw your maximum mines and then the 3 on top of it for Curtain Call. Speaking of which, this is the essentially crux piece of the build. The reason we're doing tri-stack is for a few reasons. Number 1 is Curtain Call. This thing says, hey, if you have 800 dex, 800 intelligence, you can throw up to 2 additional mines. What that means is essentially we don't need minefield support in order to throw a lot of mines. Minefield support comes with a really bad less throw speed multiplier, and generally, unless you juice mine throw speed out the wazoo, it usually feels pretty clunky to play. Now with this thing, you get the extra mines, you don't have to do mine through field support, and you can feel pretty fast generally if you have a couple jewels with some mine throw speed on it. I think it's beautiful. I love this helmet. Essentially, this helmet is like a 200% more multiplier. Not exactly how the math checks out because minefield, you have the opportunity cost of minefield, etc. But still, this thing feels great to play with. And essentially, if you're going to go with the reservations I have here, which is triple purities, you're going to need a reservation multiplier. Ultimately, this reservation multiplier, this corruption is rare and it's expensive. So what I'd recommend if you don't have this reservation multiplier, which a lot of you following the guide won't have, I want to stress, it is not necessary. If you check my video I posted before the league even started, I had a non-reservation multiplier on the helmet. And now the difference is between now and then is we lost 10 all res per each special flask. And we lost the 20 all res used to be able to go to 40 all res. So you lost about 30 all res between now version and the version I made for the Gravedigger video, which was the video for this build before the league start. Essentially, all you need to do to account for this res loss is get yourself some jewels like this that have resistances already on them on the suffix pool. You probably need about 2 jewels with an all res suffix, essentially with a adorned with about 100%. That'll end up giving you about 40 all res. Or if you have a little bit higher Adorn, you'll get more from it. Now, speaking of which, I don't want to get into Adorn yet. First, I want to finish cover the basics of Tri-Stack. The Tri-Stack, we get up to 2 additional mines from Curtain Call. What other benefits does Tri-Stack provide? Benefit number 1, which is one of the main reasons you go Tri-Stack over something like Tri-Instack or why it works so well, is Magebane. This thing right here means we have close to capped spell suppression. We have 98. If I just get a little bit more dex, which I will as I invest more in the character, I will suppress cap. Now you'll notice with my tree or with my gear, I only have 1 piece with suppression, and that's these boots right here. Ultimately, I believe if you continue to min-max this character, we are only level 95. You can eventually get to the point where you don't even need suppression on your gear. But I just wanted to stress, essentially what this means is you can get very high suppression in a character without really investing into it. Essentially, we just have this pathing here, and you will get a high amount of suppression. That's a good defensive layer that comes with Tri-Stack. What are the other benefits? Cyclopean Coil, this belt right here, gives you 1% per 5 of your lowest attributes. With 1,000, 1,000, 1,000, that is 200% damage, but it doesn't stop there. You also get 1% of your 5 lowest right from this mastery as well. That's another 200% damage. But it doesn't stop there. You also get 1% per 5 strength, which is another 200% damage. So you're at 600% damage, but it doesn't stop there. We also, from this tree, are getting quite a bit of life due to having a lot of flat life from our dex from our Shaper's Touch, life from our strength, and we prioritize life on our jewels where we can. Percent life is a pretty big priority. And we ended up having a character with 7,000 life. Our Wrathpith shield here gives us roughly around, if you calculate it out, we have 7,000 life. That's about 350% spell damage from this shield. So we have almost 1,000% damage on our character from a few sources where it doesn't really, it's like 1 point here, 1 point here, 1 mod on a belt, and then our shield. It all works well to get us a lot of percent damage that allows us to still spec around and grab a stuff that isn't percent damage, but have a really high amount of it. On top of that, we also get our crit capped for pretty much no real thought, except get the attributes up. Essentially, Righteous Providence, this node right here, crit caps us. Between this node and Wrathpith, and we do get a little bit of extra crit from power charges because we are using Charge Mind because the throw speed plus Frenzy Charge just feels good in my opinion. We crit cap without actually doing crit chance supports, and it feels pretty good because we are getting 1,052 crit chance from Righteous Providence, and we're getting another 350% crit from Wrathpith. Essentially, you're taking a skill that has 6 base crit, which Hexblast Contradiction has a higher base crit than the regular Hexblast, and it goes up and you get crit capped. Not only that, the other thing we get for damage is Hexblast Contradiction. This skill itself, it has, usually Hexblast plays around the curse multiplier, where it gives you 150% more damage if the enemy is hexed. And on top of that, it says enemies resistance by the lowest, or the caster's resistant by the highest instead of the lowest, which is what it normally is on regular Hexblast. I want to stress here, this confuses a lot of people. It's chaos damage specifically. And the way this essentially works is on most monsters, generally in the game, most like bosses have like say 50% elemental res and 30% chaos res. At baseline, generally chaos will be lower. So usually if you are using Inevitable Judgment, you are ignoring the elemental res and thus your chaos damage is going to be effective. But the crux of the issue is our main damage source is lightning. So ultimately this line doesn't really matter that much. So if you're worried and saying, okay, say you get elemental weakness on your gloves and you're worried that's going to make the elemental res of an enemy lower than the chaos res, it doesn't matter because this is only chaos specific. Our base damage is basically all lightning, which means Inevitable Judgment is still going to come into play. We're going to ignore their lightning res and we're going to completely obliterate them. Now, that being said, Inevitable Judgment feels great against a lot of map mods and stuff. If you want to really truly min-max the damage, you probably can start investing into Lightning Pen, going out of Inevitable Judgment, and maybe go into like a Pious Path setup. You can do some weird stuff, but I don't want to go into that because it's a little bit more complicated and it's a decent amount higher investment. It involves stuff that I don't really want to worry you guys with. And besides the point, this just has so much damage already, I don't think it's worth really doing. Outside of that, the other benefits to Tri-Stack is, you'll notice Magebane has a line that says, Dexterity provides no inherent bonus to evasion. This would be a downside, except there is this mastery right over here, which says evasion rating per 5 intelligence. And it says Dex provides no bonus to evasion rating. What essentially we're doing is we're trading the evasion rating of our Dex for suppress, and then we're losing nothing because now we're getting all that evasion rating back through intelligence. Not only are we getting 200% intelligence or 200% evasion rating from intelligence, we're getting 200% from our gloves, which gives 2% evasion per 10 intelligence, which ends up meaning we have 36 evasion character without a single relevant piece of evasion gear. Granted, we have like 194 evasion here, 46 evasion here, big whoopity-doo. The point is we have 36,000 evasion. That's a lot of evasion. Essentially, if I min-max this character more, get a bit more reservation efficiency via jewel corruptions, we could actually fit in Dread Banner and a Grace Evade Watcher's Eye, and we would literally be at 95 evade cap. That is 95% of all attack damage doesn't even hit us. That's very strong, especially when combined with suppression. Now, I want to speak a little bit more about the one weakness this character has, and that is... Oh, sorry. I'm going to go into another defensive layer. We also have 86 max all res. Granted, I didn't cap my fire res, so I'm one under that. I am planning to use the Impossible Scape for Imbalanced Guard to get 2 max res here, 1 max res here, and double damage here. Huge value. That would get us to 89 max all res. Essentially what that means is elemental damage, not that much of a problem. If I invest a little bit more, min-max my gear a little bit better, I could get my chaos res capped as well. So that takes care of elemental chaos. But the one big thing that's left in our this is dangerous to us is physical damage. We can solve that with a few things that I want to recommend to you, but I haven't implemented yet in this character because I haven't gotten to that stage of like actually just setting it up. And number one is you can run Taste of Hate for 15% Fizz taken as, and all you would need to do essentially is you would need to get one more jewel with flash duration. You'll see this jewel, we have one jewel of flash duration. That is enough for these flasks to be consistently up throughout basically all content in the game. Taste of Fate has a little bit less sustain than Core Scaling Elixir, but if you got a Taste of Fate and you corrupted some quality on it, and you got 2 jewels of flash duration, that should be a permanent uptime for Taste of Fate, as well as Core Scaling, as well as your Topaz. So that's 15% Fizz taken as there. You can also get up to 8% Fizz taken as on your shield. You can also get the 30% Fizz taken as on your Watcher's Eye. I'd probably go for like 2 mods with Fizz taken as on your Watcher's Eye, or 1, and that is going to be around 30% Fizz taken as. Ultimately, when you have 30% plus Fizz taken as and over 8k ES pool, there are very few things in the game that can kill you. If you get up to 50% Fizz taken as, you might be able to even take an Uber Shaper Slam, which is one of the highest Fizz hits in the game. And outside of that, if you're worried, okay, what if I get chipped down by Fizz damage? There is a solution for that, and that is this mastery right here. Recover 5% over 1 second when you get hit with any sort of physical damage. Essentially what this means is if the enemy's physical hit does not hit you for more than 5% of your ES pool, it is giving you net sustain. This stacks. Say you have a guy that is going to hit you with like a bunch of attacks a second. This will give you a bunch of ES per second. Like if you get 100 hits in a second, you will recover 500% of your ES in the next second. So it's a very strong defensive layer for physical. Takes care of basically all the small hits. And as you invest in more, get a higher ES pool, it gets more effective. So that is the defensive layers of the character. That's the idea, the building blocks. Now I want to explain one more very important thing that I always get questions about, which is why Eternal Youths plus Zealot's Oath. This is very important. We are a blood magic character. What does that mean? That means we cost and we spend our skills via spending life, right? Now, we need, number one, to sustain our ES pool. So we do that via grabbing it's Zealot's Oath. Zealot's Oath makes our life regen. Whenever we get like 1% regen here, 3% regen on our flask, 5% regen for consecrated ground, whenever we get regen mods, all that stuff will apply to our ES, right? So that helps us sustain our ES. We also get things like Ghost Dance, which helps us sustain our ES. We also have this, which helps us sustain our ES. But the question is, when you do that, how do you sustain your life? Because once you do Zealot's Oath, you no longer have a way to sustain life, and that's a simple, easy solution, which is Eternal Youth. The way this works is, one, the less regen does not affect the Zealot's Oath regen, so the downside doesn't even hurt us. Two, the recharge never turns off unless you, one, take damage from something to your life pool, which the only way that happens is if an enemy basically hits you for all of your ES pool and then your life pool, which is, if you survive that, you just like barely survive with an inch of your life, right? Because that would have been like, they just need to do 200 more damage to kill you and they just didn't quite hit you off. That's the one way, like you have to take damage to the life pool. And number two is if an enemy does something that turns off your recovery. I'm doing a lot of T17 maps, and the very common mods are Cirrus Awakener Ground and Exarch Ground effects. Both of those things turn off your recovery when you're on them. So what happens is you walk over the ground effect, and the way recharge works is when it's been turned off, it has a 4-second timer for it to start again. Essentially, those ground effects can be pretty annoying, but the idea is you just keep moving around until that 4-second window is over and you can start casting again. Those are the main things. Generally, this should never turn off outside of the things that turn off your recovery, i.e. ground effects and like Maven's laser beams, those things that turn off regen. Stuff like that will turn off your Eternal Youth. And then the one other outside scenario is a bug with predictive mode, or people with like really bad internet using predictive. There is an issue where I've had reports of people having their recharge stop, and from what I can tell, it's generally related to predictive. If you run into this, swapping to lockstep for most people solves it. For some people, if their internet's bad enough, it might not, but that is one thing I've noticed is there is an issue with predictive mode where Eternal Youth or energy recharge applying to your life will get turned off because something to do with internet, not 100% sure, but that's what I've narrowed it down to. I've had a lot of people come in and say, hey, I'm having issues, and most of the people, we've tried different things, and the solution that's worked 90% of the time has been going from predictive to lockstep, and very few people came in that had that issue, had lockstep on. All of them pretty much had predictive, and once they swapped over, it fixed it, so I just want to note that there. All right, now, getting into the rest of the character. I want to go over a few things that you need and a few things you don't. A lot of people want to ask me, they say, hey, do you need Adorn to start this build? Number one, no, you do not. Made the video before the league where I showcased the build with magic jewels. Magic jewels have 2 stats. Rares can have up to 4 stats. And those magic jewels, I was able to kill a Phoenix, a 30 million HP target, within the matter of like a second to 2 seconds, like 1.5 seconds. And that was with magic jewels without Adorned equipped, i.e. I had subpar gear, very subpar gear, no Adorned, and I was specifically using weaker jewels. So number one is you could just use rare jewels and the build will still be strong. Adorn is a massive upgrade when you can get to it, but you do not need to start the build. Number two is if you're going to swap to Adorn, at what point do you do it? What percentage? If I was going to craft a bunch of magic jewels, and you can do this by either alt spamming with fracture jewels, alt spamming and auging, and then maybe taking some settle mods, or you could do something where you buy a mod that, or buy a jewel that has 3 mods or 2 mods you want, but 1 mod you don't, and then do a split, and that can result in a magic jewel with the mods you want. You have all those options. You have to corrupt at the end of the day. Corruption like a 50-50 chance whether or not it bricks into a rare or unique, or it just gives you an implicit, or it doesn't change at all. But the point is, if I was going to make a bunch of magic jewels, I wouldn't really want to commit to making them unless I had at least a 100% effectiveness. Adorned is what I would recommend to you. That makes all the jewels essentially like 4-stat jewels, but it's 4 ideal stats. Kind of that thought process in my head. Ultimately, as you min-max your build, investing in getting the high level Adorned will upgrade your character. That's a lot to take in. Another thing I should say is we are currently using a Rational Doctrine with Augury of Penitence. Before I got Rational Doctrine, I was just running Sanctuary for the ground effect whenever I was standing still, and then I just had 1 more jewel for extra life and extra stats. I'm not necessarily convinced Rational Doctrine is best in slot for this build because of how strong jewels are and the fact this node isn't really that much stronger. So I would almost recommend not necessarily going this, or going, if you do go this, then you get to swap here. I don't know. I think I'm in between on it. This is one thing I would hold off unless you're really min-maxing for that feels good of the reduced curse effect and the extra sustain. Consistency. Outside of that, you can use a lot of cluster jewels where you just alt, aug, regal spam, basically aiming for things like chaos res, attribute res, effectiveness, life, stuff like that. And just do that on clusters with spell damage or lightning damage are probably preferable. Ultimately, I just got a 3 passive voices. This was one of the smallest, most expensive upgrades I've done so far. I would weight this as only marginally better than the large cluster I had before it, which was a cluster that looked similar to this, because what ends up happening is you trade 15 all attributes, 18 chaos res, which is pretty good, for 18 all attributes or 18 mind throw speed or 14 life, 28 crit multi. The point is you're trading some decent stats for just marginally better stats. So I would hold off on voices if you're thinking about min-maxing or upgrading this build. This is one of the very last upgrades. Obviously, when you min-max, 1 passive voices will be the best, but it's not as big of an upgrade as you might think, for especially how expensive these jewels are. Outside of all of that, stats you want to prioritize are all attributes, mind throw speed, and percent life. Those are pretty much your priorities. You can maybe fit in some chaos res here or some all res there, elemental res there if you can't fit the reservation for triple purities. Speaking of which, if you're not going to run triple purities, I recommend a Tempest Shield, Discipline, maybe Dread Banner setup, something like that, where you get more reservation space. And it just means you need more res on your gear. You're not going to have the max res, but you're going to have some other additional defensive layers, like the fact you block 25% additional spell attacks or spell damage, whatever. Anyways, going through a lot of stuff here. As for crafting, there are basically 2 items that are rares that you need to craft in this build. Everything else is uniques. And that is a ring, and that is a boot. Now, number 1 for the ring, the crafting process is as follows. Helical is your best in slot. That's number 1. Number 2, you need to do a Chaos Reforge. This is a 1 in 6 to hit. Oh, sorry, let me go back a little bit. You need at least an item level 82 helical ring. That hits all the T1 stats we care about. Attributes, Chaos Res. Now, as for crafting it, Reforge Chaos, you're doing this up to 6 times to hit T1 Chaos Res. Whenever you hit T1 Chaos Res, you're going to fracture. Essentially, annul off if you have 5 mods, annul 1 mod, and go for a fracture. 1 in 4 to hit, and every time you miss, don't worry, you don't have to buy another base. All you need to do is get an Augment Orb, an Amethyst Flask, and then you need to if you miss the Chaos Res Reforge, you won't have Chaos Res Fractured. You go to the bench, you Reforge Chaos again. It needs to be like a T3 or lower mod. And then you go to the vendor, and you put in the Amethyst Flask, you'll put in the Augment Orb, and you'll put in the Helical Ring. And what it'll do is it'll give you back a Helical Ring with a higher tier Chaos Res that's magic, and it will not have the Fracture. So it's a way to clean off the Fracture, and you can go again. So that's how you get the Chaos Res Fracture on the perfect base. And then after that, I would recommend doing Deafening Essence of Sorrow, the Dexterity Essence, until you either A, hit all attributes, or B, hit some combination of high tier flat attributes. If you hit good mods, then you want to do a Suffixes Can't Be Changed. If there's a prefix, you're going to have to risk it a null and do a Veiled Orb. This will give you either a Veiled prefix, and you can craft life, and then you can benchcraft all attributes, or benchcraft a hybrid stat that you don't have. Or B, it'll give you a suffix, and maybe you can unveil like a Strengthened hybrid, which is actually the best in slot. This is a little bit weaker than if I had unveiled Strengthen Int and then had T1 all attributes on it, for example. A little bit weaker, but it's still quite strong. Or, I don't know, you lose, basically this ring is about 30 less dex than I would have at the top end if I had done the unveiled hybrid. But anyways, that's the idea for the craft. You're essence spamming until you get some good mods and doing Veiled Orbs to finish and a bench craft. That's kind of the idea for the ring craft. That is a very important upgrade, very expensive. The first really big, if you're going to invest into something, this is the first big upgrade I would do in terms of investing 10 plus divines. Outside of that, the other thing you have to craft is the boots. Now, I bought these off trade using the trade search I had set up for the guide, which I will include in the notes section of this POB. I'll include that trade search I included for everybody else for TriStack, where you can adjust the weighted sum. But if you're going to craft the boots, I would recommend going for a Fracture of either Suppress, Strength, or Dex. Essence spam until you hit Suppress, Strength, or Dex, like those three stats. You can also go for an Abyssal Socket if you want to really min-max. And then once you have your ideal suffixes, all you need to do is Suffix Can't Be Changed, Veiled Orb, Block Life, Unveil Movement Speed. That's pretty much how it works for crafting the boots. Outside of that, everything else on your gear pieces should be uniques. Either A, it should be Astramentus, or B, Eyes of the Great Wolf. There is a C option, which is 3 rat, but I really wouldn't recommend it. That is crafting a rare, but it's like a 1 in 20 plus now on the Jorgen craft, and it's just crafting that many amulets it would be rough. I wouldn't really recommend the 3 rat route anymore because of how you can't, it's a much larger range to get 3 rats, so it's a lot more agony in trying to craft it. Outside of that, your best in slot, I think, is probably Eyes of the Great Wolf. There is Simplex. I think Eyes of the Great Wolf might be better than Simplex. I haven't 100% run the numbers, but if you're doing a Simplex craft, I think the best in slot mods are probably flat all attributes, percent attributes, and flat life. And I don't know if that beats Eyes of the Great Wolf. You'd have to like plug it into POB to check. I think with TriStack, Eyes of the Great Wolf gets a power spike because you get percent attributes, which is important for all 3 attributes. You're stacking all 3 attributes, whereas Simplex is much stronger when you just want to stack 1 or 2 attributes. So I'm not quite sure. That one you'd have to do some math on. Outside of that, Wrathpith, Shaper's Touch, these are your go-to uniques with Cyclopean Coil. One thing I will say, you need a curse on hit. It can be Temp Chains, Enfeeble, Vulnerability, Ellie Weakness. It doesn't matter. Just need a curse on hit. The way Hexblast works is you get a empowered hit when you have a hex already on the enemy. So you walk around, your Blasphemy Aura makes this enemy cursed. He has Enfeeble on him. Then you throw your Mind. That blows up, hits the enemy. And what happens is it consumes that curse that was on it. It consumes it. It does the 150% more AoE hit. But then your curse on gloves applies the hex afterwards, after it consumed the curse. So what happens is it consumes the hex and then reapplies, which means your next hit will consume the hex and reapply. You need both curse on hit and blasphemy. Blasphemy is important for clear to feel good. If you're just doing bossing, you might be able to just drop the blasphemy altogether if you're just doing bossing. But if you're doing map clear, it's important to have the blasphemy so that way your first hit has that AoE and it actually clears. Then, for single target, Blasphemy does not reapply the curse fast enough to keep up with your mind hits, which is why you need the curse on hit to guarantee every hit will have that empowered 150% more damage multiplier. Okay, hopefully that explains a lot of the inner workings. The other things I will say that is important for gem setups is Energy Blade right here, the skill. It's the thing that reserve, or basically it has a debuff that makes you have less energy shield, and then it gives you flat lightning based on how much energy shield is left. Very, very important to push quality on this thing. You'll notice I have it linked to in a level 4 enhance. The reason for that is it has the buff grants less energy shield mod. If I take out this enhance, it goes from 39% less to 45% less. So you'll see I go from 7k ES to 7.9. That is roughly over 10% more damage and over 10% more tank from adding the enhance onto this. Do not forget to quality your energy blade. Very important. The best in slot corruption for something like a Shaper's Touch is a curse on hit and a +1 socketed gem, because that +1 socket will give you 8 more quality, thus making this go from 39% less to 37% less, thus giving you another like 400 ES. Very nice upgrades to go for. Outside of that, we also have it linked to our detonate mines, linked to automation support. This is one of the best things that has ever happened to mine builds. I don't care what people say. This makes mine so much better to play. Essentially, this thing right here, if I show you my mine detonation, you see I'll throw my mines, is automatically proccing these all the time, making sure, one, I don't have to put it on left click and worry about holding down my left click. I just don't even have to care. And two, I can be walking around doing whatever, thinking about other things, and the mines will still be going off. I don't have to put my brain into play. It just works. It makes this mine build feel like a self-cast build in terms of quality of life. Feels way better. And so that's the automation gem linked to detonate mines. The quality makes them go off a little bit faster. You do want some detonation speed, so that way your mines can keep up with how much you're throwing out when you're attacking enemies. So that's the idea there. And then as for other gem setups, we have Enfeeble Blasphemy. You need Awakening Blasphemy for reservation space and a little bit more AoE. I would recommend it. And then we have Eternal Blessing with Grace. This is one of the great things you can do with blood magic characters. And it's something that I don't think people quite realize about blood magic and why people don't use it more often, is you get one free aura. You get to do Eternal Blessing with your Grace, and then you get to reserve your life pool. Now, people might think, is that actually that much reservation space? Yeah, it is. We're running triple purities. We're running a blasphemy and a 50% reservation. This is a lot of reservation space, and we only have one reservation mastery. Well, granted, we do have Enlighten, we do have the reservation multiplier, but still, the point is you get a 50% reservation for aura for free, and then you can do a mastery like this for 20% reservation space. It works out pretty well. And I think something that people sleep on about blood magic builds, you can actually get away with reserving more than you might think because of Eternal Blessing you get for free. It stops you from reserving stuff on your mana. It doesn't stop you from reserving stuff on your life. Outside of that, we obviously have the triple purity with Enlighten. I would swap this for a Tempest Shield and Discipline and Dread Banner until you can afford the cost reservation multiplier and the Enlighten. Essentially, that just means you have to have more res on your jewels to cap your res. It should still be plenty fine. It might be a little bit harder to hit the 800, 800, 800, in which case you're going to probably need to prioritize some more decks on your tree via the notables. You might have to grab this notable as well. Outside of that, other gem links we have a shield charge with faster attacks. I just think this feels good as a movement skill, so I'm using it, as well as Frost Blink. We have that too. And then we have an automated Called Arms with Enduring Cry. This gives us permanent uptime zone endurance charge while mapping, and every 8 seconds or whatever it is, I should check the cooldown time on this. I don't know if it actually says the cooldown time. Cooldown time is every 6 seconds. Okay, so every 6 seconds, we're getting another 1,000 regen, just 1,000? It might be 2,000. Yeah, it gives 2,000 regen every 6 seconds, so that's another boost of regen to help our sustain, and the endurance charges for more fizz reduction to help our tank. All right, hopefully that goes over all the items in the character in terms of what we have set up here. Now I want to talk about a new item added to the game, and that's the Parandus Pact. This item adds +2 all attributes to everything within its radius. We get 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. You get the idea, right? A lot of flat 2s, but then we combine this with a natural instinct right here, which gives movement speed. And then on all the small stats, it's giving us up to 38 all attributes. So you get 38 here, along with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. You're getting 26 plus 38, which is, what is that? 64 flat all attributes from this one jewel. Very strong jewel. We combine it with Unnatural Instinct. Works pretty well. This is, I want to stress this, strong, but is it that much stronger than 2 magic jewels? If they're 8 all attributes with % life, I think ultimately, I'm going to test it real quick. I think we will lose our all attributes, but we probably will gain back higher ES just because we'll gain life. Let me see if I have some jewels laying around that are... this one is 6 all attributes. Okay, I don't have ideal jewels for this. Okay, I have some non-ideal jewels. So these are, let's just compare. These should be like, if you're comparing, it should be 7% with 8 all attributes, but we have some lower tier ones. Let's see how this goes. Put this on and then put this on. Okay, so you'll see we gain ES, but overall we lose quite a bit of attributes, and we lose movement speed, and we lose attack speed. So I want to stress, this is very good, but it is expensive, and ultimately it's not necessarily stronger. I think it's higher quality of life, and it's maybe a little bit better on the attributes, a little bit better on the suppress, but it's not, how do I put this? It doesn't make or break the character. I want to stress that, because these jewels are rare and expensive. So I want to put that stress there. And as speaking for rare and expensive, I will also give the example of another rare and expensive jewel, which is Emperor's Mastery. Now this jewel, I do believe actually is best in slot for a tri-stacker. I think for a single stacker, int or strength, or a hybrid stacker, strength and int, I think this loses to a magic jewel. But in a tri-stacker, I think it ends up winning. But it's not like it really is overpowered winning. Let's check. So on the stat line, if I put in one of these jewels, ES number you see is roughly the same. So the flat damage is going to be the same. Where this jewel takes off is the attributes. Look at our attributes. 1280, 1025, 980 versus 1004, 1052, 1320. So main difference here is this will end up being a jewel you use to min-max, but it is not necessary to, like, the difference in power is not that much. As you min-max and make your character stronger and stronger, the gap gets a little bit wider, but ultimately I want to stress this. This is a very rare jewel, very expensive. It is marginally better than a decent magic jewel. I want to stress that so everybody's aware when they look at this and they say, Emperor's Mastery, I can't afford this build. Yes, you can. The power level difference is not that much. And I want to stress that magic jewels, Adorn, they're just good. It's very hard to beat them. So the fact I am barely marginally beating with these like very strong jewels should let you know, hey, Adorn kind of strong though. All right, so hopefully I've stressed that well. For jewel stats, I would recommend at least getting 3 jewels with mind throw speed. Outside of that, I would recommend all attributes is your best stat. I don't have min-max jewels. I have a lot of crit multi jewels. I'd prefer all attributes, but I just kind of worked with what was on the market when I was buying them. Ultimately, I would go for all attributes if you can. If you want to min-max, I think that is the better play. You'll get suppress cap faster, stuff like that. Anyways, oh, also I probably should min-max this duel. I don't need this to be strength and dex anymore. At the time, I had done this in order to balance my attributes. For Cyclopean Coil, sometimes certain stats being higher give you certain mods. When I had put this jewel in, I needed a little bit more strength and int in order to make Rational Doctrine work for the shock immunity. Ultimately, or for the Calm Ground. Ultimately, if I dropped Rational Doctrine, I could get shock immunity by making int higher, and that might work out better in the end. So try out different things, see what works for you. This is the setup. Hopefully I've gone over every specific piece that matters. I'm going to include a POB. I am going to have a link to the trade search for people that want to do weighted sum for the rares, which is what I'd recommend. Buy these rares from the trade search with a weighted sum, with good attributes in life and ES, until you can afford to craft this. The build works great with just rare rings, but min-maxing is, of course, ideal. So Helical is one of the biggest upgrades you can do. As far as investing, this is one of the first big things I'd spend on. Outside of uber min-maxing, then you start going for things like Emperor's Mastery and Parandus Pact. But anyways, this is the tri-stacker. My throat's getting sore because I've been talking so much. Hopefully I explained things well. Let's go ahead and give you a little showcase on a Fortress T17, which is what I've been doing, a lot of T17s. Give you a little look, see what this likes going, what it looks like going through a map. Use my throat. I've been talking a lot the past few days, answering questions and stuff on stream, so I don't think my throat's really recovered from that. I have loved this build. It's stronger than I really quite pictured to begin with in terms of like how well it's scaled. And I just want to share it with people and let people try it because it is really crazy damage for the level of gear you can get the damage at, and it min-maxes and can become pretty insane. I'm probably going to min-max it maybe a little bit more on stream, keep playing it, and then I'm going to be working on some other projects. I have a Valdo farmer planned. Newsflash, Valdo maps are basically non-existent. I don't think it's just because of Elixir. I think they also heavily nerfed the rarity of those boxes as well, because last league those boxes drowned out the entire market. They were more than half the supply of basically everything. So I think they nerfed the rarity on those things. Now, this is a T17. I think it's with... I think I have a tank mod on this. I can't remember if I have a tank mod on this map or not. I definitely have a tank mod. He would be dead already if there wasn't a tank mod. I'm like 90% sure. It's got to be like suppress or something. 100% more monster life. Okay. But yeah, still, even with 100% more monster life, we just absolutely shred him. There is pen there, so we had to be a little bit careful about that. And these bosses always give you some nice fragments, which give you the access to the Uber bosses. Side note, from my experience, Uber bosses are straight up easier than T17s. If the mods are... If they have one mod or two mods that add some level of difficulty, the T17 will be harder. If there's no mod that add difficulty, T17 is easier than Ubers. But their difficulty is pretty close. They can be quite rippy. Now they added the ability to chaos those maps, so now you can avoid some of the bad map mods, which is nice. Anyways, hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching. As always, take care, Exiles, and peace out.